What's going on, everyone? My name is Curci, and I played The Last of Us Part 2. This is going to be a spoiler-free discussion, so if you have not played the game and you're worried about spoilers, don't worry. I'm going to be super vague. I'm not even really going to touch on the story that much, because it's kind of hard to talk about the story without getting into spoilers. Granted, I'm probably going to spoil the first Last of Us game, so if you have not played the first Last of Us game, would highly recommend you go do that, especially before you play this game. Like, go play the first Last of Us game, then play this game if you're interested. But the first Last of Us game is so good. You also might notice that I'm not calling this a review. Is this going to be a video styled the exact same way as some of my more recent reviews? Yes. So if you're looking for my review, this is the video you're looking for, but I don't want to call it a review. That's why I kind of restructured it to being I played The Last of Us Part 2. Because I realized that, especially with this game, it is a very divisive game. The critics think one thing, gamers think another, which is happening in movies and pretty much anything. It's all subjective though. Just because I think something's good doesn't mean that you would think something's good. And calling it a review feels like I should base things more on fact. So I just want to leave this more as like an open discussion. I don't want to call it a review because I don't see myself as a video game critic. I don't see myself as a video game journalist. I'm just a guy that enjoys playing video games, enjoys talking about them, and enjoys editing videos. And I just mush all that stuff together to create the product that you're watching right now. So it's a discussion. It's my opinion. You might not agree, but this is just what I think. So the main story of The Last of Us Part 2 takes place about 4 years after the events of the first game. Ellie's older, she's integrated into this new lifestyle in Jackson, which is the city that Tommy and his wife Maria's from in the first game. So after the events of the first game, Joel and Ellie go back to Jackson and they lived for 4 years with that new life. Just being a part of community, making friends, just having some version of a normal life in a post-apocalyptic world. And then something terrible happens which triggers Ellie to go on a revenge quest, and that's what this game is. The main plot is Ellie getting revenge for something terrible that happened to her at the beginning of the game. One of the other things that I really enjoyed about the story of this game is the supporting cast, the other characters that you interact with, because even they are going to have their own story. Some of them are a little bit more compelling than others, but I think that the characters are done really well. I like the fact that there's a little bit more to this world than just Ellie's story. Like, you only care about Ellie, because I feel like in the first game, it's Joel and Ellie, and even though they interact with different people throughout the game, it is strictly speaking a Joel and Ellie story. This game is more focused on Ellie for the most part, but there are other people that you interact with, that you meet, that will have important story elements. And this is probably about as much as I can talk about the story without getting into spoilers. I might do a spoiler-filled discussion on this game, because there are things that I do want to talk about. Just can't talk about it in the spoiler-free discussion. Now, an important thing with playing video games is understanding what this game is. In the case of The Last of Us, it's a game that wants to tell you a story. If you're going to play a game like Doom Eternal, you're playing it for the gameplay, you're not playing it for the story. So understanding what the game's main purpose is important when you're going into it and you're playing it. In this regard, it's giving you compelling gameplay, but it's also giving you a story, and that's kind of the big thing with this game. So the story has to work. And here's the thing with this game. I think the story works to a point, but there are certain elements in the story that I think don't work as well. This game might not stick the landing like you hope it would. I think it's also important to bring up that this is a long game. I actually thought it was wrapping up about 2 or 3 times before it actually did. And I think when video games and even movies do that, you mentally prepare yourself for the story to wrap up, and then when it keeps going, you almost have to like re-trigger yourself to keep going. By the time the game is actually done and you've rolled credits on it, you've gone through a roller coaster of emotions and you are exhausted. And I'm all on board for games giving me a whole lot of stuff. I just think that in this regard, there is such a thing as too long. You could have cut things out to sort of condense it. I think overall, if I look at it and you're asking me, is this a good game? Does it tell a good story? I would say yes, but I think there is room for improvement. Oh God, it's so hard to talk about this without getting into spoilers. I can obviously get more into that when I do the spoiler-filled discussion, but let's move on from the story. Let's actually specifically talk about the gameplay itself, because I think this is a strong element to this game. Because why do people play video games? Because of the interactivity, because of the gameplay. Regardless of what the game's most important thing is, whether if it's trying to tell a story or whether it's trying to have fun with the gameplay, I will always hold gameplay to a higher regard than story. And the gameplay, the style, and the look of this game is fantastic. This is what I've really enjoyed about the first Last of Us, is that it feels real. Each gun carries weight. It feels powerful. So when you fire it, you're making a commitment that you are using ammo on this enemy. So when you miss, it hurts, because ammo, it's not in abundance. There is ammo around. You can find ammo a lot, but you're usually going to find like maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 bullets here and there. So you're never carrying around full ammo at all times. Like, some guns that you don't use are going to eventually accumulate full ammo, but once you switch and start using it, you run out quick. It's not like a Call of Duty game where you have all the ammo for days. Eventually you're going to run out. So you at times have to think think to yourself, should I use this gun because I have more ammo, or should I use this gun because it's more powerful and I'm going to do more damage? You have to weigh your options. And also, one of the things that I really liked is just how the animation of this game is. It flows. Whenever you get shot, you fall down sometimes. And I think that that is a really immersive way of being in this game. And the first Last of Us did it. Every time you got shot, you reacted to it. Your character was like, oh, god damn it. Some games do that, but I don't think any game does it quite as well as The Last of Us does it. Because most games you get shot and you're just getting hit. Sometimes your character will stagger a little bit, but then they just push forward like nothing happened. Whereas in this game, if you get hit by a good shot, you will collapse on the floor and then you're flat on your back. And I think that in a lot of ways, this game can be immersive because you don't want to fight enemies. You want to sneak around them because you don't want to use ammo if you don't have to. But then you get into these action gun shooting situations and you just have to be careful as far as where you are, where the enemies are. They will flank you. Sometimes you get hit by an enemy. You didn't see that they were to your right, and then you just kind of panic and you run. You take damage and you got to find a good place where you can use a med kit to heal yourself. Find supplies so that you can craft a med kit so that you can apply it. And this takes time. The crafting is also back in this game. You're going to be going around to other rooms, extra places, just so that you can gather supplies so that you can put together things like med kits and Molotovs. You're going to find scrap metal and workbenches that are scattered throughout the world, just like in the first game, and they're all there so that you can upgrade your weapons. You can find pills, supplements, so that you can upgrade your character and perks. Pretty much everything that is there in the first game. You still have that listen mode so you can see enemies through walls. You can upgrade that so it's more effective. And then there are different enemies in the game which force different strategies, which is, I've always said, was something that I really enjoy about games. There are human enemies and then there are infected. Don't forget that this game is a post-apocalyptic world because there was this virus that hit people and it was a fungal infection and it kind of took over people's minds. But it makes people go nuts. It makes them go feral. They find people, they eat them. They're basically zombies. And there are multiple types of infected that force different strategies. For example, there are runners, which is the early stage of infected people. When they see you, they're just going to blitz at you. There are clickers that kind of, I think they're clicking their teeth. But clickers have this fungus that has grown over their eyes so they can't see and they have to use this sonar technique in order to get around. So their hearing is spot on and you have to go super slow in order to avoid them or even sneak up on them to take them out. And they're a one-hit kill. If they grab you, most likely they're going to bite you. If you don't have a way of fighting them off, they're going to kill you, which is just like in the first game. Also from the first game are bloaters. They are infected that are big, bloated. They're also blind, but they're kind of harder to take out. They'll pull like fungal pieces off of themselves and throw it like a gas grenade. Although in this game, they feel like they're more tanky. Like they'll bust through a wall and just run you down, and it's a lot harder to take down than in the first game. There are stalkers. They are sort of skittish. Like they're gonna want to ambush you. If they attack you, most of the time they're gonna run away. They're gonna want to hide behind corners, wait for you to get close, and then try to ambush you. If you play Days Gone, they behave a lot like newts. But whenever you're in an area where stalkers are around, it's a little bit more nerve-wracking because sometimes you hear them, you just don't see them. So you're really not sure where they are. So you're always like going around corners with your gun, just like, all right, he's going to be around somewhere. And then there's also that, do I attack it with melee or do I go after it with my gun and use ammo? In which case, it's harder to hit enemies that are blitzing right at you and try to get that headshot, because headshots are the best way to take enemies down because you use one bullet and they're done. But sometimes you miss the headshot completely. Other times you hit the body, and if you hit the body, you gotta use more than just one shot to take him out. It's just hard to do that when an enemy's blitzing right at you because you're like panicking, like, oh god, hurry up! Unless you got like a shotgun, you just blast them. But shotgun shots are something you would want to stockpile on. You don't want to use it unless you absolutely have to. And then the other enemy in this game are Shamblers. They're like kind of in between. What are they in between? They're not blind. I discovered that like late game. I thought they were blind. They're not. They can see you. So I think they're like a type of infected that have evolved differently than clickers. Like they're not blind. They are these bigger guys. They're like bloaters for the most part. They have like an area of effect. When they get close, they're gonna like explode this gas or this like kind of acid thing that's gonna do damage to you over time. So you always want to keep them from a distance, but they are a new type of enemy in this game. It's almost like the Shamblers took the place of the bloaters and the bloaters became tanks. For the most part, whenever you're fighting infected, you're going to want to keep quiet. You're going to want to do stealth. If you go loud, they're all going to swarm on you. It's not like human enemies that are going to want to take cover and gives you a chance because then you could take cover and sort of plan out your strategy after that. When you're in a room full of infected and they're all blitzing at you, strategy goes out the window. Your basic instinct is to just survive. But I talk about the human enemies because while they're not infected, they're going to behave differently. And they also have dogs now. Dogs in video games always stress me out. For the most part, I don't want to kill a dog. I love dogs. By the way, if you really like dogs and you don't ever want to see a dog get hurt, this game might not be for you because dogs are going to get hurt in this game. and you're going to be the one to do it. But dogs have an interesting mechanic because they can pick up your scent and they can follow this trail to you. So you have to like throw a distraction, like a brick or a bottle, to hopefully get them off the scent, have them chase the noise instead. It's just a little bit more stressful because sometimes it's going to force your hand, because whenever you're stealthing through an area where there are enemies, it's easier to stealth when there isn't a dog, because sometimes the dog's going to smell you and it's going to force you to make a move, because sometimes you could just sit there and wait for the enemies to kind of move and create an opening, and you have all the time in the world if you're in a good spot. If the dogs are there, they're going to eventually smell you, and if they get to you, obviously put everybody on alert, and then you got a bigger problem. And there are even different types of human enemies in this game. There are different factions that you have to contend with. So even amongst the human enemies, there are different types. Some of them are going to strictly stick to melee. Some of them are like heavies. So like a headshot won't take them down, which is weird to me. Like even if you're an infected, I can understand like the fungal has formed and created like armor around your face. But if you're a human and you're not wearing a helmet, which most of these brutes are not wearing a helmet, or heavies, whatever you want to call them. I don't exactly know what the game refers to them as, but if you're just a person with your head and I shoot you in the face, you should go down. So there shouldn't be a situation where I shoot you in the head and you stay up, which some of these heavies do. It was one of the things that pulled me out of the immersive experience and reminded me this is a video game, which is one of the things that I really don't like the video games do. If I'm immersed, keep me immersed. I also really enjoyed the set designs of this game. In the first game, you start from Boston and you travel all the way to Salt Lake City. You travel all the way across the country. There are different areas and different set pieces that you encounter along the way. Like the game, I think for the most part takes place over the course of a year. Sometimes you're in a forest, sometimes you're in a suburban area, sometimes you're in a school, sometimes you're in a broken down building. But because they're traveling a great distance, it's not that surprising that they would see so many varying set pieces. But in this game, for the most part, you keep to one city. The game mainly takes place in Seattle. But even then, even though it's only sticking to one city, it is really interesting to see how unique each of the areas are. Because I was afraid that at a certain point we were going to see a lot of the same elements be repeated. There's one area of the game, and it's early on, that I didn't like. When you played the first Last of Us game, it was a linear story. There was no backtracking, there was no open world elements, you just moved through, and it did well with that. And when I played The Last of Us Part 2, I expected the whole game to be that. But there's one part early on where it's a little bit more open, where you get a map and there are points of interest, and I understand that it's trying to immerse you in the story of you're in this area, but you're not really sure where to go next. But I think that it was too open. It should have just kept it linear. There's a way that you can funnel me on a linear path and still keep the narrative of I'm not sure where I'm going. This is something that I don't like the video games do, is that if you've created a franchise that is based in either open world or linear, then I would expect other games in that franchise to stick to that same idea. For example, Gears 5. Gears 5 did this. If I'm playing a Gears of War game, I'm playing a cover-based shooter. I just want to shoot enemies and move forward. But Gears of War 5, Gears 5, whatever it's called, did this thing where a couple of times there were these open world elements and you could just sort of venture around, and there were these side quests and these side objectives and points of interest. And I was annoyed because that's not the game that I was expecting to play. So when The Last of Us Part 2 started doing this early on, I was a little annoyed by it because I was like, I expected a linear story. I just wanted something that was similar to the first one. Just give me more of that. And eventually it got there, because that was the only time that it was ever open world. I mean, looking back, I think it was done well. I'm glad that it stuck to the linear stuff because that's the game that I wanted to play. I think that I would have still liked the game if it had just committed to the open world element. Overall, I think it made a better decision to keep it linear. At the end of this game, I liked it. I think the story was good for the most part, but it definitely had some points where it tripped up, and it was also too long. When you're telling a story, you need to know when to end the story. There was a big pacing issue. So the game loses a point because its focus was to tell a good story, and I think it was losing me narratively in certain areas. From a gameplay standpoint, I'm glad I got as much as I got. The most important thing is gameplay, and I think they nailed the gameplay. It was great, which is why I think overall I like this game. Now, here's the thing. Do I recommend it? I would recommend this game because I had fun with it. If you can look past some of the story elements and just sort of say, you know, I enjoyed playing The Last of Us and the gameplay, then this game is just going to be even more fun for you because it's a lot and it's good. It's about over 20 hours of gameplay I played. That's what you're looking for. That's what this game is. I think it's great in that respect, but I think it struggles with the story element. So if you're in it entirely for the story, I mean, if you played the first game, you're going to want to play the second game. I would look, here's the thing. I would recommend this game because I had fun with it from the gameplay. It's a video game. You're gonna play it, form your own opinions about the story. It might upset you, it might not. This is where the divisiveness comes from. All the divisiveness of this game, because I think it is universally praised on its gameplay elements. It's the story that's divisive. I will just leave it there. I don't want to get too far into why I think it's divisive. I think that there were spots where it tripped up. I think it didn't stick the landing. I think the narrative was too long, but I think overall the game was good. I'm repeating a lot of the same stuff. I just want to get my point across. I enjoyed the gameplay. Story could have been better. Now I'm going to wrap this video up because there's not much more I can say about this game without getting into spoilers. So with that said, I am going to tease my next video because I am going to do a spoiler-filled discussion about this game. It is going to be entirely about the story. We already talked about the gameplay. I want to talk about the story, so we're going to do a spoiler-filled discussion. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing so you can be notified on any new videos. Hit the bell icon so that you can get those notifications every time I upload something. Hit the like button because it really helps out how successful this stuff is. If you enjoyed it, just give it a like. And that's all I'm saying. Comment below what you thought about the game and also consider watching some of these other videos. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.